Hello and welcome to the joint CUGH-NIH webinar, Grant Writing for Success, Preparing an NIH Grant Application. We want to thank Paula Strickland for joining us. Dr. Strickland is the Director of the Office of Research Training and Special Programs at the NIH and NIAID. Thank you very much for walking us through the process, and we look forward to learning quite a bit from you. Paula, I'm going to pass the floor to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Karen. We're going to talk now about grant writing for success. Upon completion of this session, you will be able to list significant steps involved from application to award. You'll have the ability to basically explain the fundamentals of writing a clear and concise research grant application. And you should be able to describe the differences in writing a career development grant application compared to a research grant application. When you start, the first thing you want to know is, where do I start to look for funding opportunity announcements? I recommend you start with grants.gov. You start there with grants.gov webpage, and it's the U.S. site for grants. Then you want to narrow your search to start looking. If you're looking for biomedical research, the next thing you want to do is go to the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts, which is our official publication. Once you're at the NIH page, and you should narrow your search even further based on your research areas, you would want to start to look at specific areas of research, and you want to read the NIH Institutes and Centers research missions. So before you begin to write or even submit your NIH grant application, here's some things I think you should consider and think about. First of all, you should have a general knowledge of how the process works, and that's what this slide is showing you. Plan your application, plan the content. Then you want to find a funding opportunity, which I've just explained to you how to do that. And then you'll start to write your application. Once you write it, you're ready to submit it. And let's say we're going to submit by grants.gov. It will then, once it's in and everything is in order, moves on to peer review process. Your application may be reviewed by the Center for Scientific Review Study section, or it could actually go directly to one of the institutes, and they all have, most of them have their own scientific review panel. NIH has a two-step review process. So the first step is the initial review, which I just explained to you, and after that, your application goes to the second level of review, which is the NIH Advisory Council. Once it goes to council and it clears, then a decision has to be made in regard to funding it. And if you're successful, you'll see a notice of award, an NOA, that you receive as an applicant. This process will take you about 9 months. So the idea is to be sure to plan for that, understand it's going to take that amount of time. So the first thing I said is that you should become familiar with the NIH institutes and centers. You should recognize that the NIH, its structure is 27 institutes and centers. The research mission varies for each IC. While there may be some overlap, there is a dominant area of research that each IC is involved with. Things to consider when you're getting ready to submit your application: the types of people and organizations that are eligible to apply. Eligibility is very important. Please make sure you're aware of whether you're eligible or not for a particular funding opportunity announcement. Become familiar with grant programs that are offered. Then determine if you need prior approval from your organization and or NIH to apply to one of our funding opportunity announcements. Once that's decided, be sure to communicate with your organization's designated authorized organizational representative or signing official. You will need those individuals to submit your application for you. So those are the ones who are authorized to go into the system and submit the application. In regards to the NIH, as I said, it's 27 institutes and centers. And you'll notice that at the bottom, there are 3 institutes that are in blue. Those 3, well, it's 2 centers in it, and this all 3, they do not make grant awards, but they have key roles at the NIH. The other 24 do. Then in regards to the Fogarty International Center, that's the one I put up for you just to get you started. That particular center puts a lot of emphasis on researcher training. They fund research capacity building programs in low and middle income countries, pretty much more so than some of the other institutes. They fund research projects in a variety of areas, including areas such as infectious disease, chronic conditions, population health, informatics, genetics, clinical, operational, and health sciences. So it's a variety of projects that they may be funding. And they have their own budget. Each IC has a budget. But what is good about being part of the NIH is that our institutes and centers can collaborate. And in doing so, we can combine some of our budgets or portions of our budgets, or decide we're going to all go in on one particular funding opportunity announcement, or a few of us will go in. So that's what happens with Fogarty. They collaborate with partners within NIH, the institutes, centers, and offices to support non-U.S. research. And this is just their funding opportunities website. There's a lot of information at the Fogarty, and you'll see that by the headings. But what I wanted to pull up for you right here is for you to look at the funding opportunity announcements. And please note, if you look now at the table at the bottom, there's an application due date. Be very conscious of that. You'll see the title of that particular funding opportunity announcement, the area within Fogarty, the program responsible for it, and then the last column talks about the type of opportunity. And that what I will be referring to sometimes is the mechanism, the award mechanism. So the first one, for example, says exploratory or developmental research grant. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that kind of grant. It's really an R21. So we use a lot of numbers and alphabets. But it tells you the type of award, and that means something as well, which we will talk about as I go along. That's the site. That's pretty much what it looks like. And then at the bottom, you see I've given you the web address. The next institute I want to just highlight is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, or NIAID. We support a lot, and that's the institute I'm with. We support and conduct global research, and probably more so than any of the other institutes at NIH that fund global kinds of research projects. We fund a wide range of international biomedical research in infectious, immunologic, and allergic diseases and conditions. We do fund training. We do also provide training and collaborate with scientists from around the world. Currently, we support projects in more than 100 countries. Global research covers a broad spectrum of diseases and conditions, and I've just mentioned a couple of them here: HIV, AIDS, malaria, influenza, tuberculosis, diabetes, asthma, and many others that relate to our mission. That's the kind of research we will look to fund in terms of global research. And on the side, I've listed our address of the website. Let me just show you, take that back for a minute. Let me just show you when you come on to the NIAID funding opportunities and announcements, the way that page looks is you'll see there's a box to filter announcement by. So you can decide what topic in the area of that's within the mission of NIAID that you're interested in. And so what I've done here is just put in HIV. And when you do that, then you'll see this is just a portion of the list of funding opportunity announcements that are currently open, and it also gives you the expiration date, so you have an idea of when This particular FOA, or Funding Opportunity Announcement, is going to expire. You would go there to the title, List of Interest, and all of those are hyperlinks, and that gives you more information about that Funding Opportunity Announcement. And that's just for the NIID. Pretty much all of the ICs have a similar page where they'll talk about their specific opportunities and announcements. As I mentioned, award mechanisms. The NIH has a lot of award mechanisms. We try to, the way we get our funds out the door, the NIH has a budget, and the way that it provides funding is either by way of a grant, a cooperative agreement, or a contract. So if we look at grants for a moment, grants are they're investigator initiated. So the investigator has an idea of what they want to research. They can then also look at program announcements, and program announcements give you some idea of the areas of research that the institute or a particular institute is interested in. There's also another way of knowing what we're looking for to fill a research gap, might be the request for applications, so that's an RFA. So those two, there's a program announcement, the PA, and then there's the RFA. The other mechanism we use is called cooperative agreements, which are very similar to grants. And then the main difference is that there's a substantial amount of NIH staff involved. So they'll be more so involved with the investigator as you're working through your research. Those types of grants or cooperative agreements are solicited, so they will only be presented in the way of a request for applications. The other thing we have, another way of getting money out the door and to the biomedical community, is by way of contracts, which are solicited. And those contracts will become in the form of a request for proposals, or RFP, or broad agency agreement, which we refer to as a BA, or there are other contract mechanisms. But the key point here is that when you're saying that I want to apply to a contract solicitation, you're offering to provide a service, and the NIH will then pay for that service. So that's the main difference. As I mentioned, we have lots of grant mechanisms and types of research grants. So I've only listed kind of 4 here, but there's 60 or 7 mechanisms. So I highlighted these 4 because they're most frequently used, both within the U.S. and outside. The first one is the Small Grant Program, or RO3. It's limited funding for a short period of time, and it does support various types of projects, which may include a pilot or feasibility study, collection of preliminary data. The direct cost of the budget for that kind of mechanism is up to $50,000 per year, and it's limited to 2 years of funding. While you don't necessarily need to provide some preliminary data to apply for or be eligible for an RO3, from my personal perspective, it's always good to include some. It just strengthens your application and it makes it clearer to the reviewers what you're trying to do. The next one is the Exploratory or Developmental Research Grant Award, which is called the R21, and I pointed that out to you on one of the funding opportunity sites for the Fogarty. So this type of award, the purpose is to look for new exploratory and developmental projects. So it typically supports early stages of a project. It's limited to 2 years of funding. The budget for the direct cost for the total cost for 2 years, for that whole 2-year period, not per year, is $275,000. Again, no preliminary data is generally required. The world is very competitive when it comes to getting a grant. I, again, personally recommend that you include some preliminary data just to show that what you're proposing is feasible, is something that can be done, and you can show that. It'll just make your application look stronger. The next application in yellow is the RO1. Most people try to get an RO1 application, and we find that it's our most popular award mechanism. It takes some doing to get one, but when you do, it's always great. So it's used to support a discrete, specified research project. NIH's most commonly used grant program, and the budget cost or allowable budget is typically under $500,000 per year. So that's what you want to make sure your budget does not exceed that. On some rare occasions, should you see that in order to get this done, it will cost a little more than $500K, and you can justify that, you can write a letter and request that you have permission to submit an R01 grant application that has a budget greater than $500K. I'm just saying that's allowable. It's something you can do, and you can find that on the web page. I recommend that you keep it below $500K if that makes sense and it can be done. This award is generally awarded for 3 to 5 years. The other one in blue is the Research Project Cooperative Agreement, or UO1, which supports discrete, specific projects, etc. And it involves a substantial, and I put here NIID, but it could be any of the institute's program staff involvement. There's no specific dollar amount, but it is specified in the funding opportunity announcement, or FOA, what that limit is. So pay attention to that as well. I've often had the requests for sample applications. Can you give me an example of an application? So if you go to the websites that I have here in the slide, there are sample applications that you can open. And not only have these applicants given us permission to make these available to others, they've even gone as far as to allow us to let you see the summary statement. After a grant makes it in, as you remember from the process, it goes to peer review and it's reviewed, and as a result there's a summary statement. So this includes the application and summary statement for the different mechanisms. The other question I sometimes get is, well, what about collaborations? Would we fund that? What are some ideas for them? So I've included a few examples or ideas here. One is to develop or implement a collaborative research projects, and you can conduct that with a current NIH awardee, which the benefits that individual successfully received an application and can help you as well, so you can work together on that. Another idea for collaboration is perhaps to identify opportunities for scientific exchange between early stage investigators and experts in the field or related field. Work together in that regard, and perhaps there's some way you can submit an application that shows that that's what you're going to do. You can conduct workshops or symposiums where you bring together scientists and expert researchers and clinicians, and this is a good way to meet people who have similar interests, and you may plan to work together. The other is network with research administrators who are managing NIH awards. Sometimes as scientists we tend to look at, this is what I need, this is the research I want to do, but you need to work with your research administrators. They need to understand what you have in mind and also can provide the assistance in areas that you may not want to focus on, like the budget, what's allowed, what does the Institute allow. So I always recommend when you're writing your application, consider bringing in from the beginning your research administrator to work with you. Think about your specific aims and your research strategy. Think about and develop language that clearly describes what your project is about, and it indicates to your partners who your collaborators will be, what they will each be, what you will all each be responsible for. That needs to be clear, because you have a group of people who are looking at your application. You're not there to help make things clear, so make sure that that's clear. Research strategy. Make sure you have sufficient information in the grant application so that folks there can really evaluate what you're proposing to do and can work with you. Provide clear plans and goals for the research. The other is, as I mentioned previously, engage your administrator. They can help you develop a well-developed and appropriately budgeted financial management plan. I put this in at this point because you also need to think about a clinical trial, or if your application is going to include a clinical trial or not. This is going to become very important starting on or after January 25th. So become familiar with the NIH definition of a clinical trial. When you're proposing research that will include a clinical trial, it's going to be important that you follow the correct FOA and make sure that funding opportunity announcement allows clinical trials. If you submit an application in response to an FOA that does not, it may not go on to be reviewed, and you'll spend a lot of time and effort trying to pull it together an application that won't even go to peer review. The other thing I just want to bring to your attention is that the NIH Forms E-Grant application, those instructions are important, especially for the due dates on or after January 25th. The first link gives you information about the notice that NIH put out, and then there's a video tour, so you can read that or go to that site and look at the video. It'll tell you more about the forms, and this is where the human subjects and clinical trials information form will be, and you can see that as well. So now I'm going to move over a little bit to career development applications, which we call the K applications. If you'll see right here, I've given you a link to the research training site for NIH, and it's a career path. Each one of those stages, there's the right training for the individual at a particular stage. So basically, for the career stage, if you think about it this way, you have the graduate student or medical student, then the kinds of training you want to look for: pre-doctoral training. Postdoctoral level, you'll be looking for fellowships or transition grants, such as what we call the K99R00. Sometimes you may hear it referred to as the Kangaroo Award. Then there's the right training for early stage researcher. Maybe you're at the stage where you're ready to become an independent researcher, but you still need some mentoring, so there's mentor training grant. The mid-career researcher is now at the point like a K24. As I said, we have a lot of alphabets and numbers. At that stage, you've been successful in your career and you're ready to train others. So you may want to get some apply for a K24. And then there's a senior researcher, of course, who will apply for a lot of things based on what's available in their expertise. What I have right here is just an example of a funding opportunity announcement for career development. Here's the example. Please note that it says parent K08, and the parent K08 indicates that this is the funding opportunity. It's broad, it's the general one that you can respond to for a mentor clinical scientist research career development award. You'll note at NIH, if there's not a specific announcement, every application has to come in response to an FOA. So we create what are called parent FOAs. You'll see parent FOAs for K08 or parent FOA for R01. Okay, so just be familiar, that's what that parent indicates. Also note, and it's very important, that notices come out after a FOA is released. So you need to check the notices to make sure you're not missing any information. And finally, on this particular page, you want to look at the program announcement, the number. So you want to have that ready for when you submit your grant application. So if you're writing a K application, the Ks that I've mentioned so far, they're for clinicians at different career stages, but there's also types of career development awards for non-physicians. There's the K99R00 Transition Award, which can be for physicians and non-physicians. In all cases, check eligibility. Many times you'll find that you've submitted an application, but you're not eligible. Pay attention to the review criteria. In the case of a K application or a training grant kind of application, that the reviewers are looking at the candidate, the mentor or mentors or co-mentors. They're looking at the career development plan, goals and objectives, and the research plan, and the environment and institutional commitment of the institution where the training will take place. I know I've provided you a lot of information so far in a short period of time, so throughout the process there's always some help. Sometimes it seems like it's hard to find, so I put it right here for you. If you go to the NIH page, you see I've highlighted, I have green arrows pointing at the researchers, so this is information for researchers. In other words, we found typical questions researchers ask for foreign applicants. There's lots of questions that you may have specific to because you're outside of the U.S., so I pointed to those as well. So this is a good place to go if you're not sure where to look for information for your particular need, including research administrators as information for you. So for a funding opportunity announcement, read the FOA sections carefully and completely. I can't say that enough. Identifies the application due date. If you come in after the due date, we get so many applications, there's a good chance your application will not be reviewed. Check eligibility. You want to spend months and weeks preparing your application only to find out you're not eligible. If you're outside of the U.S., then please consider these questions when you're preparing your application. It'll make it clear how you address these things. So the reviewers are going to look to say, okay, does this application from outside the U.S. present any special opportunities for furthering research programs? Special. So it's not something we have readily available in the U.S. Does the application indicate any unusual talent, resources, populations, or environmental conditions that we cannot replicate here? And the key part, again, is this readily available in the U.S. or not? So they're going to look at all. Those are key points that they will look for in regard to applications that come in outside of the U.S. This is just an example of what a FOA might contain. So that's pretty much it. But what I pulled out here is eligible organizations, Section 3. If you're outside the U.S., please look for Section 3 and look for eligible. Foreign institution, you want to have it that says are eligible to apply. Again, non-domestic components of a U.S. organizations are eligible to apply. So be sure to look at Section 3 in regards to whether your organization is eligible to apply. Just another example of the complete part of it, and I pointed out again, in this case it's an RO1, so that's the mechanism. You know what it can do, you know what the budget's like. The key dates, you don't want to be late because you just won't get in. One example, I'm just putting this up for administrators in particular. This is Global Infectious Disease Research Administrator Development Award for Low Middle Income Country Institutions, which is called a G11. And the purpose of this particular announcement, which is labeled PAR 15131, this particular FOA has expired, so it's an example. But if it comes out again, or if you're looking at other sites that offer G11s by NIH, the purpose is to provide support to senior administrators. So there's the purpose, and the eligible applicants are located in an LMIC as defined by the World Bank. And for NIID, we have our requirements that you have to be an NIID grantee and have received less than $2.2 million in total NIH grant support. So it's just an idea of what we have, and just so you know that things can be different for each IC that offers this, but it does exist. Now I just want to point out the extramural research team. These are people who should be working with. Your grant applicant, you have questions. Here are the folks who can help you. Grants Management Specialist, Program Officer, and Scientific Review Officer. And each one has a different role, but all want to help you. For the Scientific Review Officer, that is the peer review process official. So that official is the one who leads the group. Each grant application study section is led by an SRO, and the SRO is the official in the room to make sure that each application receives an objective and fair peer review during that meeting. The other individual that's important to know is your scientist and administrator. He manages scientific research portfolio. This individual identifies research opportunities and needs. They set up priorities, stimulate interest in specific scientific areas in their particular area of science that they're focusing on. They communicate the research program opportunities, and they can help you. They can provide advice before and after peer review. So when you're responding to a funding opportunity announcement, it will list the scientific contact or program officer. You have questions, check with that person. Same thing for a contract. If you're responding to an RFP for a contractor, that person may be called the contracting officer representative or core, same person with same types of skills. Grants Management Specialist, you have questions about the budget. If you haven't received the award and you want to make sure, is this something that's allowable or not allowable, then you want to get that guidance. And that guidance can be provided to awardees and applicants. They will help you with the grant policies as they relate to a grant award. They handle all matters relating to the notice of award. Remember, I mentioned if you're successful, you're going to get a notice of award. These are the folks who can help you to know, okay, I have it. They're the ones who will send it to you. And so you can ask them questions as it relates specifically to the grant budget. So once you go through the process, pretty much basically going to do research grant application. You'll submit it by way of your grantee institution signing official, who will then submit the grant to grants.gov and ERA Commons. Your signing official will have that authority to do so. Again, I want to remind you, adhere to the due dates. Submit by the due date. Check the FOA. I recommend, although we have listed due dates, try to submit your application several days before that, because if there's an error, it'll bounce back. And if you get the error before 5 p.m. of the due date, and 5 p.m. your local time, you have a chance to fix that error and resubmit. If you do it after the 5 p.m. and the due date, there's almost nothing that can be done. Once it makes it in, we go through peer review. The evaluation criteria for research grants. The criteria is described below. There's 5 key criteria. Significance. Is this significant work? The investigators. Are they able to do the work? Is it innovative? Is there some innovation here? Is the approach that you're proposing feasible? An environment? Is this the right place for this work to be done? So the reviewers will consider each criterion score, and they will give each one a score. And then there'll be an overall, what we call an impact or priority score, when you look at it all together and all the members work together to determine of the review meeting what that final score would be. So let's say you put it in, and it did not get funded. It was not a fundable score. You can resubmit, okay? And you can resubmit one time after the first time. When you resubmit, please respond to the comments from the previous review. That's helpful to you, and it lets the reviewers know, because it may go back to the same panel, that you have taken their comments seriously. Again, some additional evaluation criteria would be looking at if there's something specific that the reviewers need you to respond to, look for that. Review criteria will also look at whether you're involving human subject, animals, biohazards. Is this a resubmission or a renewal? They will look at whether the application is from a foreign organization. Does it include selected agents? Is there a plan for resource sharing? And the budget and peer support, is it appropriate? So then the reviewers will evaluate and score each application. This is a scoring sheet which the reviewers use. In this case, a 1 is a very good chance that your application is going to be funded. 1 by reviewers will translate into a 10. So your summary statement that you get after peer review would say 10, 20, 30, etc. So what you want to do is stay in that 1 or 10, 20 range. That's where you have the greatest chance of your application being funded. After initial peer review, your application receives an overall impact or priority score. The summary statement is written, so you get to see what the reviewers thought of your application. And the same information is available to NIH and NIID staff. A priority score and summary statement are available to applicants in NIH ERA Commons system. As I mentioned, we have 2-step review process. So the next step is that it'll go to council. So the second level of review is done by institutes, advisory, or council or board members. We're ready now to make a decision. Fund this or not? Funding decisions, we'll use the documents. Funding decisions will be made based on the documents that are presented. The review products, which include the impact score, the summary statement, and the criterion score, so the individual areas that I mentioned. Then the program factors will be considered. Relevance to the institute's mission, priorities, any recommendations from council. We also look at, is this individual at early stage? Principal investigator status is somebody we want to look out for and try to increase early stage investigators getting a grant, and other institute-specific factors which relate to the institute that's looking at your grant application. The institute final decisions based on advice from staff and the advisory board, and once the final decision is made by the IC director, of course, successful applicants receive the notice of award from the institute's grants management officer. So that's pretty much the things that the basic things you need to think about and have to do when it comes to a grant application. And what I've provided here is really some resources for researchers, because some institutes offer resources that can help facilitate your preclinical and clinical research. These are free, and you don't have to be a grantee to get them. I've listed here the NIH resources for research. Again, some of those resources include things that will help with translation of basic research. You can request this by way of a form that you submit. The tools that are available would be things in the area of bioinformatics, biological materials. You can request those, translational research. We also do tech transfer, so certain technology can be transferred. Partnering with NIH, you can bring that up, or any other IC institute at NIH, and other resources which are listed there, as well as the research rules and policies related to getting these resources and being able to use them. As I noted, other institutes besides NIH have these research resources available, and I've listed right here. You can see the Cancer Institute. They're offering things as well. They have a data catalog, they have behavioral research tools. All these are available based on their guidance, and there's no cost to you. The thing I want to point out is the reporting tool. This is a good tool for you to look at for the reasons that this provides you a free database of funded projects. So remember, the question is, how relevant is the research being proposed? Is this research readily available in the U.S.? Well, if you use the reporting tool, which is the database, you can find out what's being funded and where. And this is, again, there are some tutorials within the reporting tool that you can use if you want to figure out how to use it or what you're going to do. I also want to point out in the reporter, there's a database. It's called the Matchmaker tab. So you press on that tab, and if you enter your specific aims or project summary, you can find similar projects that have been funded by the NIH, which institutes funded those projects, which study sections reviewed them, potential collaborators funded in your subject or geographic area to ask for advice, or perhaps ask if they were interested in collaborating with you. So this gives you an opportunity to identify those individuals. And sometimes if we find people who may not have received an NIH grant, but their grant scored relatively well, then you may want to consider, well, let me look at some foundations that fund research that I'm interested in. Most of the institutes have a page that lists the foundations that are interested in the research that they're interested in. And so right here is just the one you're looking at is for NIH, but you can find a similar page on the Fogarty Institute as well. So that's pretty much everything I have. I hope that you'll take a look at our research funding opportunities. The links, I have them here for each place that you can find more information. And if you'll note here, Fed Biz Ops, I mentioned contracts. That's the place you want to go to look for government contracts related to what we're doing. Grants funding, how to apply, application guide is a really nice guide. You'll find that useful. And I also recommend that you subscribe to the NIH Guide listserv. This is the official publication for grant policies, guidelines, and funding opportunities. If you sign up for this, I believe they send listserv, which is all funding opportunity announcements weekly. I'm not quite sure, but you'll find out when you go to that link. And so you'll know when an FOA is being released. You'll know more about that. I put here the NIID funding information as well because we have a newsletter that comes out. So I put, there's a link there. There's a link to the opportunities announcements. You may be interested in those sample applications, so that link is there as well. And then some guidance for managing your award after you get one, which we hope you'll be successful in doing. There's a link there as well. So I wish you much success in your research. And I guess, Karen, we'll turn this back over to you for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula, for that very well-detailed and informative walkthrough of the process. There's certainly a lot to prepare and to think about when applying for a grant, and we're very appreciative of all the information that you're giving to us. So on that note, of course, we do have a number of viewers who do have further questions. There are some new questions, perhaps, things that may not have been addressed, some asking for review, summarizing, or further clarity, and we have quite a few questions, actually. So let's just get to it. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the first questions that came to us is from Peter. And I'll read this to you, actually. He says, for collaborative research projects and K awards, do you have to apply with other NIH awardees, or can one also apply with faculty PIs who are heavily funded by CDC, USAID, working in your area, and may have collaborated with you before?
No, you do not have to collaborate with an NIH awardee. You can propose collaborators at your institution or others that you work with. It's just at those individuals, if you've never received an NIH award, will have a good idea about how to be successful in getting one, or maybe tell you about the pitfalls that they came in, that they had, and challenges and what they had to do to then become successful in getting an NIH award.
Okay, thank you. Victoria asks us, who is the best person to talk to at the agency when trying to decide which funding agency is the best fit? So it sounds like it's debating between you right now and is seeking some guidance.
The best person to talk to about where to apply is, I would say, first start with the website. There's a lot of information there. Start by what is your area of interest. There's 27 institutes and centers, and 24 of them make awards. So if only going to the title that relates to what you're interested in, start there. And when you start there, there's a contact person that you can find on that webpage.
Okay, yes, huge website, and certainly worth spending time to explore. Susanna, actually, no, who is this? Well, actually, we have a number of individuals who are outside the U.S. With us today, and quite a few general queries about whether there are any special tips for foreign institutions, any special guidance that might hint tips that might be useful for one that is applying from outside the U.S.
The first thing I would say in regard to outside of the U.S., regard to special tips, look at that, the slide I told you about, the key questions that non-U.S. applicants should ask themselves. That's the main thing you want to pull out in your grant application. Do I have something unique and different that can't be found readily in the United States? If you do, make sure you make that clear, repeat it once or twice in your application. Find out by going to the report or two what we are funding. If we're funding a lot of what you're proposing to do, perhaps you may want to come up with a different strategy or a different angle on that topic, enhancing something, or if yours is so very different, you need to pull it out and make sure people see that it's different. That's the main tip. And also, please make sure when you're putting in your grant application, put it in early. Make sure the individuals who are submitting it for you speak English very well and read it clearly, because you want to know if your application comes back with an error, but they didn't understand that it was an error, and so you didn't get an opportunity to fix it before the deadline closed. So those are the key things I would say.
Great, thank you. Jada points out that the Office of Research in Women's Health was not listed in the list of 27 institutes. I'm not sure if that is the case, but if it is the case, then the question is, how does that office function, and does it have any grant availability?
The Office of Research for Women's Health operates out of the NIH OD, so it's within the Office of the Director, and what we have what are called common funds kinds of awards. So you may want to check there to see if they have any. They do have some awards, and it would be still come out of the Office of the Director to start there. That's one. But if you're looking for women's health, there's other places you can also look, like the National Institute of Child Health and Development, NICHD. There's a lot of women's health issues related at that institute as well. But that office is in the NIH Office of the Director.
Great. Rebecca, I hope you wrote that down. Jada, actually. So Rebecca asked us, she said she would like to apply for the International Research Scientist Development Award, FOA-Career. And she is wondering whether it is acceptable for her senior mentor to be from an institution other than her own university.
It may be possible. I'm not quite familiar with with that program, so you really need to check and see if the requirement that it be from your institution or if you can have it from another. But I will say this, it doesn't hurt to have more than one mentor. So if you have a mentor at another institution who's willing to work with you, and your mentor at your current institution is in agreement, and you see how you can all work together to make this work for you, then by all means include the mentor, and that way you'll be able to show that you're going to get the kind of mentoring that you need for that particular award.
Thank you, Paula. Evans is asking us, is there any free online training that he can seek out for research administrators for NIH grants?
Research administrator free training?
Right.
Could be. You know, we have a lot of training available for research administrators, and you'd have to, I would say, start with the page I sent you there or showed regarding questions specifically for people. So the arrows, the two green arrows just pointed to two, but there's other research related questions that you can ask, and some of that training, if it's not here necessarily at the NIH, there are video casts and other kinds of training that's available. I can't think of one offhand, but I think if you start there, you can find that kind of training.
All right. Justice tells us that he is with what he calls an ambitious young organization or a startup in the startup phase. Do you support research projects submitted by young organizations? Are there any stipulations as far as the breadth and work that an institution may already have history with?
Startups are welcome. And I'm not sure if you're talking about like a small business kind of startup, or you're just a startup institution that's starting up research. But in any case, they are welcome. We look forward to that. What's important when you submit that application is that you're showing that the research environment, okay, or if you're a startup and it's a small business, you have to show that that environment things can go the way you planned at that institution or in that environment or at that place. That's going to be the key thing. That we don't discourage new or startups at all. It's just a matter of you'll have to show we have this environment, we have the skills, we have the support of researchers or others who will be involved, and we can get this done. What we're proposing can be done.
Okay.
And by the way, if you are talking about a small business, I suggest you look at the SBIR program, which is for small business innovative research. It's a biomedical grants that we provide as well. So check with the SBIR, and you can find that information starting with the NIH.gov website.
All right. I'm not sure if this is something that falls into today's topics, Paula, but Nathan wants to know how one can volunteer to be a reviewer.
Very easy. Go to the NIH website. We're always looking for reviewers, and you can I forgot the name of it, but just click on their reviewers. You submit your resume, and we will scientific review officers who are looking for individuals who have a particular expertise. They will look at those resumes and call those individuals. Now, especially if you're a senior scientist, we're definitely looking for you. And if you're mid-career, that's important as well, because we want different ideas. But go to the website. It's definitely there. We're always looking for reviewers, so please do add your name and your resume.
That is great news. I hope Nathan is here to hear that. Nathan, I hope you wrote that down. Sarah wants to know whether opioid-related projects could be funded under NIAID Exploratory R21.
Could be, but because you're asking for opioids, I would probably recommend you look at NIAAA as well. So that's why it's important to read the mission. That's to see an NDA. Well, there's a couple of institutes that might be interested. Look at the ones that relate to specifically to what you're planning to do. Because if you're going to look at opioids, you'd have to figure out how that relates to our institute, NIAID, based on our mission. And it may be harder to show it, but if you can, by all means do it. But then look at folks who are looking at drugs of abuse, that kind of IC, because they may have more, they'd be more interested in what you're proposing. Please take a look at the institutes and their mission and try to tailor your grant so that it's clear that you're reaching their mission. I can also tell you this, I didn't put in my slide. When you submit your application, in your cover letter, you can recommend what IC you think this belongs to. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go there, but you can put that in your cover letter with your grant application.
Okay. We have a viewer here who is wondering whether it's possible to engage in discussion about his or her research ideas before the application writing process.
Absolutely. If you pick look at the mission, look at a topic that's somewhat related to what you're proposing to do. Usually we call them scientific areas of interest. And if there's a scientific area of interest at a particular institute that's close to what you're interested in, you will also see either a program officer's name or email that you can email that program officer and tell them what you're interested in. They'll let you know. And if that's not the right program officer, the program officer will give you the email of another program officer perhaps at that institute that's interested in what you're proposing. So don't feel limited, and please don't get discouraged. They may pass you off to another program officer, not because we're not interested, it's that you haven't got the right one and they're trying to get you to the best one who can respond to what you're proposing to do and give you some tips on areas of interest.
Thank you, Paula. Do you have any tips or guidance for individual researchers who are seeking out training for career development?
If you're seeking training for career development, I think start with going to the Career Path website, the training. Start the NIH training website, where look at where you are on that training. I didn't do it on the slide, but you can actually click on the slide at that link. So it'll tell you what's the appropriate training for your particular, where you are at this phase in your career. For example, graduate or medical student, what kind of training might be appropriate? So maybe some pre-doctoral training. So you may be looking at a fellowship if you're inside of the U.S. and even some outside of the U.S. So you may be looking at fellowships, pre-doctoral fellowships. You may want to join or ask or consider an institutional training grant. So institutional training grants have openings for pre-docs as well as postdocs, who there's a training opportunity there. If you're an early stage investigator, as I mentioned, the K99R00, I didn't go into detail about it, but that award is fairly popular because the K99, you can get up to 2 years of training, mentor training. And then once you have that award, when you're ready and within that 2-year period, you can actually apply for a position, and what you'll be taking with you to your position, tenure track position at an institution is what we call an R00 or a research grant. So you're walking in the door basically saying, I have with me money. I'm walking in with a grant. It's coming with me. That makes you very attractive to institutions who are looking for grant funds because you're coming in with money, and so you can negotiate better positions and lab space. So that's something to consider. And if you're a physician, there's a number of development awards available. I think I touched on the K08, so that's mentor training. There's quite a few things. There's patient-oriented research. So your focus is patient-oriented, and you have to have your degree to work in a clinic. And so you would walk in with trying for that kind of award. It just depends where you are in your phase of your career.
Great, thank you, Paula. We're actually at the top of the hour, so we'll have a final question before we close. But we do have a number of individuals who wonder if you can tell us, from historically, what can we expect as far as the percentage of funding that goes to domestic versus international?
It depends on the institute, but I can only relate to my institute in particular. So our budget in 2017, fiscal year 17, was around a little over $4 billion, around 4.4 billion to be exact. And 10 to 12% of that will go to fund research outside of the U.S. that relates to our mission. So in that case, we know that's what we'll spend. Now, each institute, based on their budget, may do a different percentage, but that's just a ballpark of what our institute does. So you can imagine how much that is, quite a bit of money going there. And just also keep in mind the NIH budget, 85% of it goes outside of the institute. We do have an intramural program that's funded, but we fund 85% of the budget for NIH goes to extramural or investigators outside of the U.S. And that's quite a bit when you're looking at a little over $32 billion budget.
Thank you, Paula. Good to know. Thank you also so much for your time and the very helpful slides and taking the time to answer all of these very specific and individual questions as well. We do want to remind the audience that if you do have a question that wasn't responded, was not answered, or you didn't have a chance to post it, you still can ask by going to by sending an email to AI Training Help Desk at niaid.nih.gov. This webinar has been recorded, and its recording will be available for viewing tomorrow. And the slide deck will also be available for download tomorrow, both at www.cugh.org. So feel free to watch it there as many times as you need. download the slides, share them with colleagues, students, fellow researchers, and friends. Here at the UGH, with Paula at the NIH, we all want to thank you for coming here today. We want to let you know that that CUGH is holding its 9th annual Global Health Conference next March in New York City. The dates are March 16 through 18, 2018, and there will be a full day of satellite sessions on March 15th. So if you haven't registered yet, definitely do so soon, and we'll love to meet you next spring. Finally, those who are in the DC local area on October 24th, which is a Tuesday, CUGH is holding a happy hour, something we like to do every now and then, so that we can get to meet you all. You can let us know if you're coming. You can RSVP by going to the CUGH website. And again, if you have any more questions, there is an opportunity for you to ask by emailing it to aitraininghelpdesk@niaid.nih.gov. And Paula, if you want to say anything else, the floor is back to you. And I just want to say one more time a very hearty thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. I hope I was able to answer most of the questions and that you find the information useful. I encourage you to please go to the NIH website often, because we try to keep you up to date with changing policies and procedures which you want to know before you submit a grant application, and put a lot of time into it, and then something's not right because of a policy change. So that's pretty much all I'd like to add. And I thank you all for listening.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Take care.